Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith, and today we're going to build a basic CRUD app using our most used data source in Appsmith, Google Sheets. So we have tons of different data sources you could use for your app in Appsmith, but Google Sheets is by far the highest one used. It comes in around 40%, and today we're going to use that to build a editable table so that you can create, read, update, and delete rows in line right in this table, just like a spreadsheet. So today's workshop will be a little easier, not as advanced as some of the ones I do, but Google Sheets is our highest used data source, and we wanted some easy beginner content out there for anyone if it's their first time using Appsmith or just first time connecting to Google Sheets as a data source. There's some best practices and some tips and tricks I wanted to cover, so this still some good content if you're familiar with this stuff, but we're going to throw in a few extra things there on top of the beginner stuff to keep it interesting. All right, let's check it out. UI. And before we create the data source, before we start building the actual app, I just want to walk through a few different things here in the data structure to point out some best practices and a few things you should do before you connect your sheet to Appsmith. So you can see that I don't have any formulas here. There's no embedded charts or images or checkboxes. I'm not relying on color formatting for a status or anything like that. You want to remove all of that stuff and get it down to just a header row and rows of data. And if you do have like a status that's based on a color, you might be used to the users. If you've got something set up with multiple users and you're all looking for like the ones that are red, that is some certain status. You'll want to add a new column for that status, get rid of that dependency on color formatting, and we're going to store it as data. And then in Appsmith, you can build a new condition that will give you the same effect. You'll still have the color formatting, but the logic for that is going to be in Appsmith. So remove all those formulas, color formatting, charts, checkboxes, anything like that, and just get it down to clean rows of data and a header row. All right. The other thing is I do not have an ID column here, and I don't want to get into the details of race conditions and multiple users trying to edit a row and keeping things in sync. It's just best for a relational system to use a relational database. But Google Sheets is our most used data source. And so I wanted to cover a real simple example here. So we're not going to cover an ID column and trying to increment it or generate unique IDs or any of that stuff. We're just going to look at how to edit and add new rows to a spreadsheet and make an editable table. Okay, so you got your sheet cleaned up, the data is ready to connect. First thing is you'll start out with a new app here. I have an empty app. There's nothing in here, no queries or JS. I'm going to go to the data section here and add a new data source and then choose Google Sheets. And you can name this whatever. If you're working with a team, I like to put my name in there so they know who created it. Also, make the data source really specific for the one use case. So for this one, it'll be my sales CRM, Joseph. And then you could create a data source that has permission to access all of your Google Sheets, but I suggest using this first option to only approve the selected Google Sheet when you give it permission. We want to be able to revoke that and not break a bunch of other apps later. If you choose all, it's convenient at first because you can go building a ton of different apps on it and it can access all of your sheets. But as soon as you need to deauthorize that, you just broke all your apps. If you make it specific to one, you can revoke that permission without affecting the others. So I make a separate data source for every single app if I'm going to use Google Sheets. Okay, so once you have selected that, then you go on to save and authorize. You'll see this dialog here where it pops up asking you which Google account you want to use, and then give it permission for the specific Google Sheet or Drive file here. Then we're going to select that one. So here you click allow first, and then it gives you the sheet that you want to connect to. It should be in your recent ones there. If not, there's a search. Okay, now that we have our data source created, we can add our first API, first query. So I want to get the accounts. and we'll use the fetch many operation. We're fetching many sheet rows. You can also get a list of the sheets, and then you choose which spreadsheet you want and which sheet from that. We want the leads table. There's a setting here for the number of header rows. That's probably 1 if you set it up like I did. And then optional, what columns do you want to fetch? So this should be enough to get a response. And you can see we have the table version here. So it's already displayed as a table in the response, but it's actually coming back as JSON. And you can see there's one extra column here, the row index. So it's giving us back the number associated with that row, but it is based on the first row of data, and that is a 0 index like an array. So just to look back at the sheet here, this is one based index and it counts the header, right? So the first row of data is 2, but here in this response, it's treating it like a database. It's ignoring that header row because that's part of the schema. It's not a row of data. And then it's 0 index, just like arrays normally are. So the first row of data here is row 0, but in the spreadsheet, it's row 2. And we will be using that row index in order to update or delete rows later. So just keep that in mind, that number is coming from the first row of data being 0. So the next thing you'll notice is that this created timestamp is coming back as a Unix timestamp. In the spreadsheet, I have the dates typed as the year, month, day, and I didn't add any formatting yet. I just typed them that way, and Google Sheets recognized that as a timestamp or a date and is storing it as a Unix timestamp so that the date logic will work, so that you can do durations and math on it. But it doesn't display the way that you would want if you just put it into the table. So next, we're going to connect this to a table and then get the date formatted properly. We'll get everything looking the way that we want, and then we can make it editable. So the easiest way to connect this to a table, there's this bind data button, and it will automatically take the response from any query, any Google Sheets or Airtable or any of our other connectors or APIs, and you just click bind data and then choose the table. And this takes that response, connects it to the table widget, and it also sets that query to run on page load. There was a toast message there that just went away real quick. So if you go back to the query, in the settings, there's a settings pane here, and it has been set to run on page load. That's off by default, but by adding it to the UI, it needs to have some data in there to see anything. And so just this little assistive thing that when you go to use that bind data, it connects the query to the table widget right here. And so it's referencing the get accounts query that I just created, .data. It's done that connection for us, as well as turn the query to run on page load. If I delete this table widget, you'll see it's no longer going to execute on page load. So it automatically turns that on and off for you just for performance. If the query isn't being used anywhere, then there's no reason to have it on. Here, as soon as you connect it to a table widget, now it is displayed in the UI, and so it's turned back on. Okay, so now that we have the data displayed in the table widget here, let's look at that date. So we could leave the date as is in the back end and then tell this table that it is a date column, create it at. So right now it sees it as a number. If I change that to a date, then it's able to read the correct date. And then for the display format here, since I don't have an actual timestamp in my data, I want to display this the same way. And so it looks the same now, even though it's stored as that number in the back end. And it's a little confusing because Google Sheets is showing it as a date here, but it returns it through the API as this Unix timestamp of number of milliseconds. But then we want to display it again as a date. So both of these applications, both Appsmith and Google Sheets, are doing that conversion for you to display it that way. So one approach is to keep letting it store the number like that, and you just make sure it's displayed properly on both sides. Other thing you can do is, I'm going to go back to the UI here, and on this created at, let's change it back to a number. And then in Google Sheets, I'm selecting this date column, and I'm going to format it as a date right here. Now let's rerun this query. And I want to look at the JSON version here. And you see that it is a string now. It is not a real date. It's displayed as a string, and you don't have to change anything on the front end. But when you save it back to the sheet, you're going to have issues trying to do durations and to use it in math, to use any formulas on it. So I would go with the first approach. If you do change the formatting here and it starts sending it as a string, then you've got to convert it in Appsmith to do some other logic with it before you can, calculate durations and whatnot. So I'm going to undo that formatting change, and we will run this again just to check. There is the string version of it. Run it again, and now it's coming back as a number. Unix timestamp. So we'll change that here one more time, and let's move that column to where we can see it here. You can drag the order of the columns. All right. So it looks like a date in both locations, but we're receiving it as a Unix timestamp. So it's in a good format to get an exact time and be able to use any kind of logic on it. Next, let's make this to where we can delete a row. Of the 4 queries that we're doing here to create, read, update, and delete, the get one here is the easiest, and then I think delete is probably the next easiest one. So I'm going to add a new column here with the table widget selected, adding a new column, and I'm going to call this delete so that we can add a delete button in the gear setting right here. We'll change the column type to an icon button, and I'm going to use a trash can icon. For the on-click event, we need a query. I haven't created a delete query yet. So we'll get that in a second, but while I'm here, I want to change the style. I'm going to make it red for a delete button. And let's move that delete column to the front where we can see it. I'll do it right next to the name. Okay, so at this point, the button doesn't do anything. Next, let's go make a new query. So we'll select to create a new query and then choose that data source from Google Sheets that we just made. And I'll call this delete lead. I think I called this account over here, but we're actually getting leads. Need to fix that. Okay, back to our delete query. We are going to delete 1, and then we want to delete a row. You could delete a sheet as well, but we're going to delete 1 row. And then which spreadsheet are we in? The CRM here, which sheet? We're going to delete a lead. And again, it asks the number of header rows, probably 1, but you may have more. And then we have the row index. So which row do you want to delete? You can see the placeholder text here says table1.selectedRow.row index, and that would work, but it could delete the wrong row. Before we finish out this query here, let's go look at the UI. So you can see the selected row is purple, but I can click a delete button on any row at any time when that row is not selected. There's a separate property for the triggered row. Anytime you use a button on a table, I think with the list widget as well, it's best to use that triggered row or with a list that's triggered item, I believe. So let's go back to the query. And you'll see that when I type table 1, there's a selected row that auto completes. Also inside table 1, there is a triggered row. So that's an object that's going to have all of the data about the row that was just clicked. And one of those things is the row index. They're all blank right now because no row has been triggered, but there is going to be a row index property. So when a user clicks that delete button, it will pass in that row, we'll get its row index and use that as the row that we want to delete. So back to our table, we're almost there. And for this delete button, I'm going to set the on-click action that's in the content here. We'll set this to run our delete lead. Now this will delete it, but we won't see a change in the table. We have to repopulate the table with a new list that's missing one. So for the callback section here, we want to use the onSuccess to rerun that get leads query. As soon as it deletes a row, it will get all the leads again and repopulate the table. So let's go ahead and test this out. I'm going to delete David here, and we see that the whole table refreshes and then that row is gone. If we look back at the sheet here, now we're down one more row, and notice that the row which was deleted was in the middle here. I think it was between 5 and 6. It's deleted and it's actually removed the entire row and moved everything up. So everything below this now has a new row index. So you definitely want to run that run that get query immediately after. If the user was to go down the list and click several deletes on the second and third one after these, the row index could be off. So you want to run that get query immediately after, refresh that list so everything has the correct row index. Okay, so we have our delete working. Next thing we're going to do is make the name editable here. We can actually make all the columns, but I'm just going to do the name for a test. So we'll go back to the full list of columns, and the table widget here, it's got a few places that you can make it editable. You can either do all columns at once, or you can deselect. Like maybe the created at time, we don't want to let them input that. We're going to auto stamp the time ourselves. So I'm going to uncheck that created at. You can enable just certain columns or do all at once there. So now we want to be able to click in here, edit something, and save that back to the database. You'll notice that as soon as you click out of it, the save button lights up. And actually, I overlooked that here a second ago. When we enable this table to be editable, this save discard column appears. So now that this button is here, it's one of the options in the list of columns for the table widget. By enabling the table to be editable, it adds these at the row level. So there's a separate multi-row update mode. I'm not going to get into that now. We're going to stick with single row edit, and that means every row has its own save button. You could edit multiple rows at once and then save it back, but we're going to keep this simple and just do a one row editable table. So we have an edit queued up right now, but we don't have a query to save it or do anything with it. So back to the query, I want to add another query with our CRM Google Sheets data source here, and we will update one sheet row, the spreadsheet or CRM one on the lead table. Now the update row object. This is the body of the object you want to send in place of that row. There's that triggered row property when you click a button. There's selected row just by the user clicking a row on the table. And then there is an updated row. So if I open up the double curly braces here so we can use JavaScript and reference table 1 dot updated row, this will give us an object that has all of the details of the row that was just updated. And so you can see that name where I've adjusted the last couple characters here. So now we can connect this to the save button on the UI. But first I want to rename this. And now we can connect this query. So back to the UI, and in the table widget, we'll go to the save button. Scroll down here for the save. So for the on save action, we'll select our new query to update a lead. And then just like when we deleted a row, we want to see the change so that we can tell a row has been updated. So I'm going to use the on success to get leads again. And it looks like my edit reset. Let's just put something in here again. Now we can click save, and it should save back to the sheet and repopulate so we see the difference in the updated spreadsheet here. Okay, looks like it worked. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. These other rows aren't showing now. And in this, back in the spreadsheet, it's stored a timestamp as Unix here, and then all the rest are displaying as a date. So it looks like it's reading the first row and then it thinks all the rest are invalid because that first row got updated to this other format. So I'm going to clear this out and put a valid date back in here with our other format. And back to the sheet here, rather to the app. If we look at the update query, so it's sending in all properties. And let's go back and make a row that's edited. I'll go and change his name back. Okay, we're not going to save it yet, so there's still a table1.updated row. And then back here, we can see that it is taking the edited value, but also all the values, not just the ones that are that have been edited, but it's the entire row. So it's trying to send that created at value again, and it's just putting in the current timestamp. So we don't want that field in there. To remove it, there's a couple different ways. You could take an object, wrap it around this, and then you give each property its own name and say that, you know, the name is going to come from table1.updated row.name. And then you'd have to go through each property and do this. So this is not the cleanest way. It's maybe the easiest to understand, but you could do the property names here and then map that to each part of the updated row and leave out that created at. That's one approach. But if you have a lot of columns, that's going to be a pain. A better way to do this is using Lodash. There's a feature to omit one or more properties from an object. So instead of having to wrap this in our own object, okay, we're going to go back to just table1.updated row like we had it. So this is everything. I want to omit something from this. So with Lodash underscore dot, there's an omit function, and it will pick out certain properties. There's the inverse of this is pick, which it will only return the properties that you ask for. Omit will remove those properties. So here we're going to use omit. Inside of that, the first parameter is the object. And then from this, we want to omit created at. And so if we look at the evaluated value, now it's that same object with that one property removed. So back to our spreadsheet, I fixed that one date that came in weird. It had the actual Unix timestamp, which is kind of weird because underneath Google's converting all the rest for us, but if you enter it that way, it throws everything off. So let's go back and save this edited row. All right. Now all of these are displaying again. A minute ago, I lost all those dates, I guess because the first one was invalid, or rather the first one was the only one that it thought was valid. So now if we look over here, it did not touch that column. So we can edit a row and it won't break the existing date. Now we have to create a row and get it to auto-populate with the date. So we don't want the user to choose when they created it. You know, it's something, it should be a log. So they don't get a chance to edit that. So next we have our row editing. We have the get query working and deleting. So the last thing we'll do is add a new query to create a lead. All right, and we will use the insert one method, one sheet row from our CRM lead sheet. So we already saw table one selected row and triggered row and updated row. Now we're going to use table one's new row. So the object that we're passing in, we're just going to reference table one dot new row. And then if we go back to the table widget, and I've got the add a row option turned on just to show where that's at. You can use the search up here to find all the different properties. And there's a toggle for add a row. So I'm turning that on so that I can only edit the fields that we've made editable. There's that check mark for each individual fields, and that applies to adding a row or editing. So here we're using the add a row feature, and we'll throw in a couple values here. Now there is a new row waiting to be added, but we're not doing anything yet when the user clicks save. So we have a query to create a lead, and it says it's going to send that new row object here. So it's got just those two fields. And back to the UI, I can make the save button of the table. Get back here to the on save. We'll tell it to execute the create a lead. And then just like the other queries, after you've created or edited or deleted one of these rows, you want to see the change in the table. So we will get rows, get leads. All right. Should be ready to test this out. If we click save, it has added the new row, but there's no date for it yet. So we're able to add a row. We just need that date to be auto stamped. And the user is not able to edit it when they're editing a row, but we want to automatically insert that value. So if we go back to the add a row query, create lead here, instead of just giving it this table one.new row, we want to add a property to this. So to do that, I'm going to cut this out of here and just make some more room here. We're going to send in an object, and I'm using the spread operator, 3 dots, and then this new row object. So if you look at the evaluated value of this, and let me go add a new row. I'll click add new and get a value in here. All right. So now that there's a new row waiting to be added, that object, if you use the 3 dots here to spread that object, this is just taking a new object container, a new set of brackets, and listing all those properties. It's putting it into a new object. This lets us add our own properties. So right here, I can say that there's also going to be a created at, and the value, I'm just going to put a string date here for a second. So this is what we want. You can see that it's taking the properties that are in that form from the table new row and then adding in the extra property that we just added here. So in order to add a new field, I'm using the spread operator inside of another object, and then this piece to get today's date. I'm going to use moment. This is a library that's included in Appsmith, and this will return the current timestamp if you don't add any parameters or any extra chained on methods here. So this is giving us back a full Unix timestamp with the time zone and even fractional on the seconds there. What we want is just the date. So I can use .format. You'll see there's a bunch of methods in here to add a duration, compare it with another date. So we're going to use the .format method. And then the format that we want, you give it a string with the placeholder. We want a 4-digit year, month, and day. And so this takes the current timestamp and then gives you back that date. So now I can take this and send it to the table with the existing values from the new row that the users typed in, and then add in that one more property. All right, let's test this out, and I want to delete this one. And then we'll run it from the UI. So we've got the save button here. And this is not this save, that's the row level. So I'm looking for the add a row save. That should run the create lead and then call back to get leads. Let's see if it is able to add the date now. And there it is. You could see it even showed it a second later. because it was showing our values that were waiting to be saved, and then the table refreshed and the date came in, and now we have the date saved there. Okay, and it's saved with the date now. So I think we've got just about everything working. I'm going to delete that and do a full entry now and kind of walk through each one of the steps. So let's see if we can create a full entry. The name, email, we're not going to do created at, so that should get stamped for us. And every other field should be editable. And I'm going to switch to preview mode just so I can see a little more here. Oh, the row index should not be editable. I'm going to leave that out though. So we'll save this and see if this is working. Yeah, it's saved, but we need to turn off that row index. So back out of preview mode here and uncheck the row index. I'm going to go back to add a row preview here. Yeah, that looks better. We don't even need to show the row index, so I am going to just hide that column. Okay, we have a full CRUD app now. We can create, read, update, and delete rows from our Google Sheet. We've got a custom UI now. We could add a bunch more stuff like a select dropdown instead of having to type in the lead source, or we could make the company autocomplete. We could put email validation on here. There's tons of options in Appsmith, but I wanted to keep today's example simple and basic and just show how to connect to a sheet and make a editable table. So I hope this was helpful. Feel free to comment below if you have ideas for other workshops. If you've got any questions on this one, you can reach out on Discord or comment on the video here or on the community portal. All right, thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.